Okay, Rabbi Say, we're on Daf Tes Amud Aleph. On the previous Amud, we saw a machlokus between Rav and Rav Kahana, and their machlokus was offered in the abstract, so the Gemara thinks that it applies to Shechita as well. Rav says that half and half, mechza al mechza, if you have half and half, it's like you have a majority. If you have 50%, it's like you have the majority. And Rav Kahana says if you have 50%, it's not a majority. The Gemara thought that perhaps it applies to the laws of Shechita. We know that if you shecht half of a siman, that's not a valid Shechita. It has to be rov of a siman. So the Gemara said, okay, maybe that's only midrabanan. But let's take a look now at another brayso on the 6th line of Daf Tes Amud Aleph. Tashma, Harei shahaya chatzi kana pagum v'hosif alav kol shehu v'gamer shchitaso k'sheira. So we're talking about the shechita of a bird, where you only have to shecht the kana, the windpipe. So if half of the kana, half of the windpipe is pagum, let's say it was diseased, and then, but that doesn't render it a treifa. A bird is only rendered a treifa if the majority of its windpipe is diseased. So you have half of the windpipe that's diseased, and a person just does an act of shechita just to cut it just slightly. So you've accomplished now a majority of the windpipe is severed, so you've accomplished a kosher shechita, and the bird is now kosher. Now, v'iyamart mechzal mechza karov treifa havya, but the Gemara says, but that's only true if you hold that mechzal mechza, that 50-50 is not a majority. But if 50-50 is a majority, so then the majority of the windpipe is diseased, and the animal should be rendered a treifa. So doesn't that prove that Rav is incorrect? So Amar Rava shiny le'inyan treifa deba'inan rov hanira le'inayim. So Rava gives a cursory answer. He says, you know what? Really, I'll tell you that in all other cases, 50-50 is like a rov. But when it comes to rendering an animal a treifa, where you need to have a majority of the organ diseased in order for it to be a treifa, it has to be a visible majority. It's a special din by treifa, that in order for the animal to be rendered a treifa, where the majority of the organ is diseased, it has to be a visible majority. And since it's 50-50, it's not a visible majority. So Amar le Abaye v'lo kol dekenhu, uma treifa de b'mashu mitra fahecha de ba'inan ruba ba'inan rov hanira le'inayim, shchita da adiika ruba lo miskar shelo kol shkein de ba'inan rov hanira le'inayim? Question mark, exclamation point. In other words, the Abaye says, your logic makes no sense. You're telling me that when it comes to the laws of treifa, you need to have a visible majority. But that doesn't make any sense. Listen, there are many cases where treifa is accomplished with certain organs without a majority. There are sometimes, as we'll go through, we see through Maseches CHULLIN, an animal can be rendered a treifa if it has a disease in different kinds of organs. Sometimes the disease or the defect in the organ has to be in the majority of the organ. Sometimes it could just be a pinhole. For example, in the intestine, in the lungs, if there's a puncture, right? All you need is a very small puncture in order to render the entire animal a treifa. It so happens that when it comes to the kana, the windpipe, you need to have a majority of the trachea severed in order for it to be considered a treifa. But if treifa requires a visible majority, even though there are other cases of treifa where only a pin is a problem, so then surely when it comes to the laws of shechita, where the only time shechita is accomplished is with a majority, is with more than 50-50, you should require a visible majority. If by treifa you're telling me that you require this idea of visible majority, then surely by shechita you should require a visible majority, and therefore Rav's halacha of 50-50 constituting a majority by shechita should not apply. So Ella dekuli alma mechza mechza eno karov. So the Gemara says, Abaye basically says, we reject this idea of visible majority being a criterion. That's not really the issue. You totally misunderstood the machlokus between Rav and Rav Kahana. Everyone agrees that when you have 50-50 regarding all other halachos, it's not a majority. 50-50 does not constitute a halachic majority, certainly not for shechita. But they were talking about a special case. V'chi itmar derav derav kahana le'inin pesach itmar. Harei shaharyu Yisrael mechza Torah mechza tameim Rav omer mechza mechza karov. Rav Kahana omer mechza mechza eno karov. It's a special case that they were discussing. Where, do we say that 50-50 is a majority or not? We know there's a halacha by the Korban Pesach. That if an individual is Tameh, what's the halacha? And if he's Tameh on Yud Daled Nisan, what does he have to do? Wait a full month until Pesach Sheni. What if the entire Klal Yisrael is Tameh? So Tumah is removed in a tzibur, and we therefore say that everyone brings the Korban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan. What happens so all you need to accomplish that is if the majority of the Kahal is Tameh, everyone brings it on the 14th of Nisan. What if you have 100,000 Jews, 50,000 are Tameh and 50,000 are Tahor? So that's where there's a machlokus. Rab says it's like you have a majority, and therefore they all bring the Korban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan. And Rav Kahana says, no, it's not a majority, and therefore only the Tahor people bring it in Nisan, and the Tameh people will bring it 1 month later in Iyar and Pesach Sheni. So that's the only time that there's a machlokus. So v'hasam my time of the Rav. So Taka, why does Rav say that this is a special case where 50-50 is a majority, even though he agrees that everywhere else it's not? Because dichsiv, it's based on the pasuk. Ish ki yeh tameh lanefesh, ish nidcha ve'ein tzibur nidcha. Because there the Torah is very careful to tell you that it's only when the individual is tameh does he bring the Korban Pesach a month later on Pesach Sheni, which implies that as long as you have a community that is Tameh, they bring it with everybody else. What constitutes community? 50-50. In other words, it's a special din in the definition of community, right? Even though normally everywhere else in the Torah, 50-50 is not a majority, but what the definition of community is even a 50%. Okay, let us go weiter. Rov echad ba'of. So now the Gemara is going to pick up on the redundancy of language in the Mishnah. The Mishnah, in order to understand this fully, we really have to go back to the language of the Mishnah. The Mishnah had a reisha and a seifa, a first part and a second part. It said in the first part that Hashochet echad ba'of u'shnayim bebehema shchitaso k'sheira v'ruba shel echad kamohu. That if you shecht 1 siman for a bird and 2 simanim in a behema, it's a valid shechita, and the majority of a siman is like shechting the whole siman. That was the first part. The second part seems to say exactly the same thing. It said the last line, Rov echad ba'ofer of shnayim bebehema shchita so keshera. The majority of 1 siman for a bird, or the majority of 2 simanim for a behema, is a kosher shchita. It's the exact same statement. Why do you have to say it a second time? So the Gemara asks, Tanina chada zibna, Ruba shel echad kamahu. So Amar Rav Hoshia. So Rav Hoshia answers, and this is going to be the consistent answer of the Gemara for the rest of the Amud. Chada b'chulin v'chada b'kachim. The Mishnah is addressing 2 separate halachos, one by chulin and one by kachim. By chulin, you have to have the majority of the siman, and by kachim, by sacrificial animals, when you shecht, you also have to have the majority of the simanim in order for it to be kosher. Utzricha, and I'll tell you why you needed to address both. He says, because if you would have only told me the halacha of rubo kekulo by chulin, maybe only by chulin is the majority of a siman sufficient, because you're not shechting the animal for its blood. But with karbanos, where you're shechting the animal to harvest its blood, to sprinkle on the mizbeach, blood is such an essential component of the shechita. Maybe I would have thought you would need to shecht the entire siman to get the most blood possible. So that's why we have to address kachim. V'yashmin and kachim mishum deladam hutzarach, aval chulin deladam lotzarach ema b'palga sagilei kamash malan. And if we only would have addressed the law by kachim, I would have thought, okay, maybe you're required to sever the majority of the siman because you need so much blood. But when it comes to chulin, maybe you don't even need a majority. Maybe 50% of the siman is sufficient. And that's why the Mishnah has to say that by both chulin and by kachim, you need more than the halfway. Now, hey b'chulin v'hei b'kachim. Okay, you've given me a good teretz. Now my question is, specifically, which part of the Mishnah is addressing chulin and which part of the Mishnah is addressing kachim? Not that this makes any difference in halacha, but just we want to know. We want to know the information. How is it being communicated? Is the Tana talking about chulin first and then kachim, or is he talking about kachim first and then chulin? So Amar Rav Kahana mistavra reisha b'chulin v'seifa b'kachim. Mimai. So Rav Kahana says it makes sense to say that the first part of the Mishnah is chulin and the seifa is talking about kachim. And by the way, this will be the opinion that is agreed upon by all of the Amoraim, as we're going to see. but each one is going to give a different reason why you can prove it from the language. Midikatani hashochet. So the answer is that if you look at the very first word of the Mishnah, it says hashochet echad ba'of ushnayim bebehema shchitaso kishera. He who slaughters, whether you slaughter one siman for an oaf or two simanim by a behema, it's a kosher shchita. V'isal kadaitach reisha bekadshim hamolek mi boile. And if the first part of the Mishnah was talking about kadshim, you don't shecht a bird, you are molek a bird, right? Because malika is the procedure for a sacrificial bird. So therefore, that proves that the Reisha is talking about chulin and not kachim. Elamai seifa bekachim shchitasu kisherami likasu kisherami boile. But one second, it's not any better. Look at the seifa. The seifa says rov echad ba'of or rov shnayim bebehema shechitaso kishera. The verb shchita is also used in the seifa. So how is it any better? So the Gemara says halo kasha aidi the salik mebehema tani nami shchitaso kishera. So the Gemara gives a very straightforward answer. It says, look at the verb and the object that is closest to that verb. In the Reisha, the subject that is closest to the verb is oaf. And therefore it says, Hashochet echad ba'of ushnaim bebehema. Since the word oaf is closest to the verb shchita, it must be referring to chulin. In the seifa, the structure of the sentence has it that the word shchita comes after bird and behema, oaf and behema. So which subject is closest to the verb shchita? Behema. So therefore, it makes sense to use the word shchita because it's closest to behema in the seifa, and oaf is incidental to that. And therefore it could be referring to malika and shchita. Now, so that's the first argument. Rav Shimi Barashi Amar Reisha b'chulin mehacha. So Rav Shimi says, I'll prove to you that the Reisha is talking about chulin from the following. Deketani echad ba'of, v'isal kadaitach bekadshim ha'ika olas ha'of deboy shnei simanim. He says, I'll prove it to you. You know why? Because the Reisha says that all you need to sever for a bird is one siman. Now that's true for chulin. When you shecht a chicken, you only have to shecht one siman. But for sacrificial birds, there's two sacrificial types of karbanos for birds, chatas and ola. For a chatas, it's true that all you need is one siman. But for an ola bird, you need to sever two simanim. So the Mishnah can't possibly be talking about kachim in the Reisha because it says that one siman is sufficient. But wait a minute. What?
Why can't it be talking about
both?
Well, because it makes sense that it would be addressing both. Because if it's referring to kachim in general, it would have to be addressing, it would have to make that distinction. But the Gemara says, but wait a minute, it's no better in the Seifa. Elamai Seifa bekadshim, rov echad ba'of, ha'ika olasof deboy shnei simanim. Look at what it says in the Seifa. It says, rov echad ba'of. The majority of one siman for a bird is sufficient. So how could that be referring to the ola? So my rov echad, rov kol echad ve'echad, uvidinhu delisni rov shnayim, kevin de'ikichatis tiski lei bechad simen, mishum hachi lo psika lei. So the Gemara answers like this. Really, the words rov echad ba'of means the majority of each simen. Not of one simen, but of each simen. Now that's very difficult to teach in the language because it says rov echad ba'of v'rov shnayim bebehema. The majority of one for a bird, the majority of two for an animal. So we're saying the majority of one means the majority of each.
Each one.
Of each one of the two for a bird. And the reason why that language is ambiguous is because you've got a chatas and you've got an ola. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's two. And so that's the reason why the language is ambiguous enough in the Seifa to fit in to work with kachim birds. But the language is unambiguous in the Reisha because it says hashochet echad ba'of. You slaughter one siman, right? So there it's more definitive because it doesn't say rov echad, it says echad, and that implies one siman. Okay, so therefore it makes sense that way. So Rav Papa Amar Reisha b'chulin mehacha. So Rav Papa says I have a different argument that the Reisha is talking about chulin. Why? Dekatani Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad sheyishchad esavrid enu pligi rabbanan olei. He says, because part of the Reisha is a machlokes in the middle of the Mishnah. It says that according to Rebbe Yehuda, it's not sufficient just to shecht one or two simanim. You also have to cut the carotid or the jugular vein or the carotid artery as well on the side of the neck for both a bird and a behema. And the Chachamim disagree, and they say, no, all you need to sever is one or two simanim, the trachea and the esophagus. You don't need to worry about the veins on the side of the neck. Now, iyamart bishlama b'chulin shapir, ela iyamart b'kodshim amai pligi rabbanon alei, hu atzmo ladam hu tzarich. Now, why should there be a machlokas? If we were talking about kodshim, and the whole function of the shechita is to harvest as much blood as possible, why would the Chachamim say that you don't have to sever the veins on the side of the neck which have all of the blood flow? Mm-hmm. Of course they should agree. So the fact that there's even a machlokas here is an indication that we're talking about chulin, and therefore the seif is kodshim. Now Rav Ashi Omar Seifa b'kodshim ehacha. Rav Ashi says, let me prove to you that the seifa is talking about kodshim from the following. Dekatani hashochet shnei rashim ke'echad shchitaso keshera hashochet di'evid in lechatchila lo. Because the next line of the Mishnah, which is not on Daf Chav Zayin, but it's going to be in tomorrow's Daf, which is a continuation of the seifa of our Mishnah, states that when it comes to kodshim, when it comes to shchita, you're not allowed to shech two heads at the same time. You can't take a long knife and let's say take two sheep, line them up next to each other and shecht both of them.
Two heads not better.
Two heads are not better than one. You have to shecht one at a time. I knew you were going to go there, Paul. So anyway, you can only shecht one at a time. What? Yeah. All right. No. Please. It's hard enough to wake up. Anyway, hashochet di'evid in lechatchila lo. It says hashochet, which implies that only if you do this b'di'evid is it kosher, but lechatchila it's not kosher. In other words, really it says if you do shecht b'di'evid two heads, it's kosher, but lechatchila you're not allowed to. That's the implication of the word hashochet. So the Gemara says, "Iyamart bishlama b'kodshim hanod l'chatchila lo mishum detani Rav Yosef tizbach shlo yushnaim shochtim zevach echad." He says, if you tell me that we're dealing with kodshim at the end of our Mishnah, it makes sense why l'chatchila you're not allowed to do this, because we learn from a pasuk having to do with karbanos that you can't have two people shechting one animal at the same time. In other words, you can't have two guys holding a knife at the same time and shechting a sacrificial animal. And tizbachu, and from the word tizbachuhu, what do we learn? Shelo yehi echad shochet shnei zvachim, va'amar Rav Kahana tizbachuhu ksiv. From the word tizbachuhu, we learn that you cannot have one person shecht two animals at the same time, and Rav Kahana says it's derived from the spelling of the word tizbachuhu. The hu at the end implies that you can only shecht it, that one. You can only shecht one at a time, you cannot shecht two at a time. But that's a law that only applies to kodshim. So that must prove that the seif is talking about kodshim. Because if it was talking about chulin, then even lechatchila you should be allowed to shech two animals at the same time. Now, as a matter of course, I don't think that that's how we paskin, because we always, it's just not practical to shech two heads at the same time. It's hard enough just to shech one head. But the Gemara's argument is that proves that the seif is talking about kodshim, and ergo the reish is talking about chulin. Va'af Reb Shimon ben Lakish savar reisha b'chulin v'seifa b'kodshim, and even Reish Lakish agrees that this reish is chulin, seif is kodshim. And how do I know that? The Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish me'achar sheshanina rubo shel echad kamohu lama shanina rov echad ba'ofer of shnayim b'behema. He asks the same question. You've already established at the beginning of the Mishnah that you need to sever the majority of the siman, one for a bird and two for an animal. So why did the Mishnah have to say it explicitly at the Seifa as well? Lefisha shaninu heviu lo es hatamid kartso umirek achar shchitaso umirek acher shchitaso al yado yachalo mirek yehi pasul lekach shaninu rav echad bofer of shnayim bebehema. Period. Reish Lakish says the whole purpose of the Seifa is to address a law having to do with a specific kind of kodshim on the Yom Kippur avoda. Now, in Maseches Yoma, it says that the Kohen Gadol had to do the entire avoda himself from morning until night. It was an exhausting day. And so he had to do his utmost to conserve his energy and to work as efficiently as possible. So what he did was he started with the sheep for the korban tamid in the morning. And what the Mishnah says that he did is that he did the very quick incision to do the shchita, severs the majority of the two simanim, and then another Kohen comes in and finishes the job and severs the two simanim in their entirety. The Mishnah then says, you might think that if the second Kohen did not finish the job, it would be pasul, And therefore, the Mishnah has to tell you, no, as long as the Kohen Gadol severs the majority of both simanim, it's kosher. But we say that as an added mitzvah, we require a second Kohen to finish the job while the Kohen Gadol is moving on to the next task. Now, Omar, so that proves, says Reish Lakish, that the Seifa is talking about Kodshin, right? And that's the whole purpose of the Seifa of our Mishnah. Now, Omar Mar, so let's go back to that halacha about Yom Kippur. Yachol lo mirek yehi pasol, you might think that if the second Kohen didn't finish the job, it would be pasol. So in Cain, so the Gemara says, what kind of havamina is that? That if the second Kohen didn't finish it, it would be pasol. How could I possibly think that? Havyule avoda ba'acher, v'tanya kol avodas Yom Kippurim einon kasheros elabo. But don't we know that the whole avoda of Yom Kippur has to be done exclusively by the Kohen Gadol? How could I possibly think that a different Kohen could participate in the vital avoda of the day? How could you even entertain that possibility? Tosfos says that the Gemara could have also asked a different question. How could you think that two people can shecht one animal if we've already established that you can't, with karbanos, you can't have two people doing the avoda with one animal? You can't have two people do the shechita on one animal. So Tosfos says, but this is the question that the Gemara chose. But the bottom line is, how could you have entertained the possibility that the second Kohen's participation is vital? We know that it can't be a vital avoda because everything has to be done by the Kohen Gadol. So the Gemara says, Hachi kamar, yachol yehi pasol midirabanan. The salka daita chamina ikop sul midirabanan, lakach shanina rov echad bo'of rov shnayim bebehema. So the Gemara says, no, we for sure acknowledge, even in the Havamina, that the Kohen Gadol's shchita of rov simanim is the vital avoda, and for sure midioraisa, the second Kohen is not necessary. But our thinking was that maybe midirabanan, the second Kohen's participation to open up the trach and the esophagus completely is necessary, but only midirabanan. And perhaps we would passel it if it wasn't done midirabanan. And that's why you need the Mishnah to tell me that no, even midirabanan, there's no requirement to sever more than the rov, than the majority. The Gemara answer is mitzvah lamarek. So then the question is, so if even midirabanan there's no requirement to sever more than rov simanim, why then was the second Kohen brought in on Yom Kippur? The Gemara answer is only lechatchila is a mitzvah. Why? Because when you sever both simanim in their entirety, you're going to get much more blood in a much more robust way. So therefore, lechatchila, when it comes to sacrificial animals, it's always better to get as much blood as you can, to pour out into the vessels as quickly as possible. That's the reason why we call him the second Kohen. It expedites it and it gets more blood. But really, even lechatchila, I mean, it's only lechatchila. But b'di'evet, if it wasn't done, it's 100% kosher. Okay. Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish mishum Levi Saba ena l'shchita ela besof v'Rab Yochanan Amar yeshon l'shchita mitchila v'yad sof. This is one of these shas sugyas where there's a lot of yeshiva charade. You know what I'm talking about? Where they debate this in the yeshivas, right? This is a conceptual machlokus which has practical halachic applications, but the conceptual component is the fascinating part of it. What is the act of shchita? Reish Lakish says the word shchita only applies to the very last part of the incision. In other words, you start the incision when you apply the blade to the animal's neck. You cut, takes maybe a second or two, or maybe a half a second, until you've severed the majority of the simanim. According to Reish Lakish, the word shchita only applies to that very last moment of incision. And Rabbi Yochanan says no. The word shchita applies to the entire process from the beginning of the application of the knife to the animal's neck until the very last moment of incision, till the very last cut. So, what's the difference? Why does this have to have, what's the practical nafkamina? So let's see. So, Omar Rava, Hakol modim heicha deshachat siman echad ovi kolchavim siman echad Yisrael shehi pesula shrei nasa ba ma'isa treifa b'yad ovi kolchavim. Everyone agrees if you take an animal or a bird and you have a goy completely sever the first siman, and a Yisrael takes over and he severs the second siman, That's not what we're debating here, because everyone would agree that the act of an akum, his shchita is not a shchita. It's as if the animal sustained an injury. It's no different. And therefore, the animal is rendered treifa immediately upon the severance of one of its simanim, so that by the time the Yisrael shechts the second siman, he's shechting a treifa animal, and it's not valid. Everyone would agree to that, both Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. And ba'olas ha'ofnami heicha demolek siman echad lamata v'siman echad lamayla psula shrei asaba ma'isa chatas ha'of lamata. Now, there will also be no disagreement in the following case. We know that when it comes to an oaf, a bird sacrifice, there's two types. Remember, what did we say the two types? Chatas and ola. The protocol for a chatas bird is that you do the malika at the base of the mizbeach, and for the ola, you do the malika at the top of the mizbeach. You have to ascend to the mizbeach and do malika there. Now remember, what did we say? By a chatas, how many simanim do you have to sever? One. By an ola, you sever two. If, let's say, the kohen did malika, severed one siman on the bottom, this bird was designated as an ola. But he did the malika on the bottom of one siman, and then did the malika of the second siman on top. Everyone would also agree that he's invalidated the bird because he's done a full protocol of a chatas on an ola bird, right? And so therefore has invalidated the carbon. Everyone would agree. It's not a question of whether you look at shchita from the beginning to end or whether you look at it at the end act. The bottom line is that you've done a full act of malika for a chatas bird on the bottom, and so therefore this bird is no longer treated like a full-fledged oaf. Ola. Lo nechlaku ela kagon sheshachta siman echad b'chutz v'siman echad b'fnim. Where's the machlokas? Here's what happened. You took a bird, and you severed one siman outside the Beis HaMikdash. This is an ola bird, let's say. You severed one siman outside the Beis HaMikdash, and then you came into the Beis HaMikdash and severed the second siman. So, Laman da'amar yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'yad sof michayev, Laman da'amar ena l'shchita ela l'basof lo michayev. So here's the machlokas. If you hold that the act of shchita is a continuum from beginning until end, so you started the shchita outside, so you have shchutei chutz, you've invalidated the carbon. But if you hold that it's only the very last incision, the last part of the cut, that is called shchita, so you didn't have any shchita outside. The shchita was finished inside, and therefore it's kosher. So Amar le Rabba Bar Shimi, Marlo Amar Halchiyum Ana Rav Yosef. So Rabba Bar Shimi objects, and he says, the master, our Rebbe, Rav Yosef, didn't say that way. He held that would also not be a machlokas, because Heicha d'shachat siman echad b'chutz v'siman echad b'fnim, nami pasol shariasa b'maisa chatas ha'of b'chutz. He says, no, if you severed one whole siman outside the Beis HaMikdash with a bird, that's also going to be pasul according to everyone, because it's shchutei chutz, because you've done the protocol of a chatas outside the temple. Even though this animal is an ola, but since you've done the full protocol for a chatas bird outside, it's been invalidated through the protocol of a chatas being applied to this bird. Lo nechluku, what? Even though it's an ola, but you did a full shchita of a chatas outside, and therefore it's pasul. Lo nechluku ela, and by the way, that would be the machlokas, Harold, right? Yeah. In other words, that would be the machlokas between the two sides. Lo nechluku ela kagon sheshachat miut simanim b'chutz v'gamru bifnim. Lamandar meyesh l'shchita mitchila v'yad sof michayev. Lamandar meyesh l'shchita ela basof lo michayev. And the machlokas would therefore be as follows. What's the case? You have either an animal or a bird, and you shecht the less than rove of both simanim outside the temple, and you finish the shchita to get rove simanim inside the temple. Okay? So that's where there's a machlokas. If you hold yeshn l'shchita mitchila v'yad sof, if you hold that it's a continuum process, so then part of the shchita was done outside and it's pasul. If you hold that it's only at the end, so since the end was accomplished inside, it's okay. So Masiv Rebbe Zera. So Rebbe Zera challenges this whole premise that there's such a machlokas from the laws of Para Aduma. And in Para Aduma it says, if you're telling me that shchita, there's a machlokas, whether it's a continuum or whether it's only that last moment, I'm going to raise a problem from Para Aduma. It says, Kol ha'asukim b'para mitchila v'yad sof metamim begadim, Uposlin osa b'melacha acheres. That anyone who's engaged in the para aduma preparation of the ashes of the para aduma from beginning until end, if a person does any kind of task to prepare the ashes, his clothing become tameh, from anywhere from the beginning until the end. By the way, the beginning seems to be at the act of shechita, because that before shechita, as we'll see in a moment, before shechita, it's not really called a para aduma yet. It's only called a para aduma once you've shechted it. Okay? So, furthermore, if a person is doing something else while he's preparing the para aduma, he invalidates the para aduma. So, for example, let's say while I'm shechting the para aduma, I'm also using the knife to cut a melon. Or while I'm burning the ashes, I'm roasting hot dogs, right? I'm doing a weenie roast, right? So in that case, there's a special gzeros hakasuv that you must be exclusively focused on the work for the para aduma. You can't be doing any side menial task. And if you do, you invalidate the para aduma. So these two halachos apply. Number one, your clothing becomes tameh no matter what stage of the process you're at. And number two, no matter what stage of the process you're at, if you're doing some side act, you invalidate the para aduma. Now, ira bapsul b'shechitasa ben kodem pisula ben la'achar pisula ena mitama begadim, period. Now, let's say a psul happens with the shechita. So what happens is there's a nick on the knife, and while you're shechting it, the nick penetrates into one of the simanim, makes the animal into a nevela. It tears it instead of shechts it. So in that situation, the animal is not called a para aduma. And therefore, no matter what stage you were involved in, whether you were involved in a stage before the animal was shechted or whether it happened after it was shechted, your clothing will not become tameh because you're not dealing with a para aduma anymore. But bahaza'asa, but if, let's say, some kind of psul happens while you're sprinkling the blood. In other words, the Torah says that after you shech the para aduma, you have to take its blood and sprinkle corresponding to the temple 7 times. Let's say someone kicks over the blood and you can't do the hazah. So the para aduma gets spoiled. Now, so therefore, but here's where it's different. Kodem psula mitama begadim, la'achar psula ena mitama begadim. If the psul occurs, let's say, while you're sprinkling the 3rd out of 7, and a guy was helping with the process before the blood got spilled. So in that case, his clothing does become tameh. It's only if you were helping after the psul happened that your clothing do not become tameh. Why? Because when it comes to shechita, if you mess up on the shechita, you don't have a para aduma, period. But when you shecht it properly, you have a para aduma up until the psul occurs. Right. So therefore, if I was working with it, then my clothing become tameh because I was working before the psul happened. It's only if I help after the psul happens, then my clothing do not become tameh.
It's not a retroactive negation of the para.
It's not a retroactive negation, right? Because it was a para aduma. Now the question is like this. That's the end of the Mishnah. V'iyamart yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'yad sof liflog nami b'shchitasa. Ira b'psul b'shchita kodem pesula mitama begadim la'achar pesula ena mitama begadim. Now, if you're telling me that shchita is a continuum from beginning until end, so then we should make the distinction within shchita as well. We should say as follows: if you were working with the para aduma while the guy was shechting before the nick penetrated the esophagus, so then your clothing will become tameh. If you were working with it after the nick penetrated the esophagus, so then you don't become tameh. Because you're telling me that shechita is a continuum, so therefore part of it is happening. Right. So therefore the distinction, just like you make the distinction with the blood, the sprinkling of the blood, you should make the same distinction by shechita. If you tell me that shechita is happens in an instant, so then I can understand why there's no possibility of my clothing becoming tameh at all, right? Because there's no during the shechita. But if you tell me that it's a continuum from the beginning till the end, so then if it's before the nick, so then my clothing become tameh. If it's after the nick, my clothing do not become tameh. Mm-hmm. So Amar Rava niskalkala shechita ka Amar shani hasam digloy milsa lamafred alav shechita hiklal. So Rava gives a very simple answer. He says, no, it's not called shchita if in the middle of the shchita it messes the animal up. In other words, if it renders the animal an avela in the middle of the shchita, then retroactively it was never shchita. It was never. It's not like it was half a shchita and then in the middle it got messed up. Once it gets messed up in the middle, then retroactively it was never a shchita from the very beginning, and therefore there's no possibility of a guy's clothing becoming tummy. So Amar Rava ikashli hakashli. So Rava says, but let's not discard the mission of paraduma, because there is a question you could ask from it, and it's as follows: Laman do Amar ena l'shchita ela basof liflog behechshera de para k'gon de shachtua b'trei gavri de gavra kama lo mitama v'gavra basra mitama. He says in the case of the paraduma, what did you say? According to one opinion, the shchita is accomplished at the very last cut, and if you're working with the para aduma, what did we say? Your clothing become tameh. If I'm not working with the para aduma, my clothing don't become tameh. So what happens if you have two guys? One guy does the first half of the shechita, the other guy does the second half of the shechita. So the first half of the shechita is nothing according to the opinion that shechita is only accomplished at the very last cut. Mm-hmm. So his clothing should not become tameh. And the second guy's clothing should only the second guy's clothing should become tameh. Why doesn't the Mishnah make a point of saying that? So doesn't that prove that shechita is a continuum from beginning until end? Mm-hmm. So Amar Rav Yosef Trei Gavri Bechad Zivcha Kamart Bar Minei Deahu the Tanina Tizbach Shlo Yushnaim Shochtin Zevach Echad Tizbachu Shlei Echad Shochet Shnei Zvachim V'Amar Rav Kana Tizbachu Ksiv. So Rav Yosef says, go back to what we taught you before. The Mishnah is not going to address that case, because when two people are participating in the shechita of one animal, of kudshim, that invalidates the animal. So of course that's not going to be addressed by the Mishnah. So that's not a question. So Amar Le Abaya, Lav Itmar Allah, Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Zudiver Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Stima Sa. Aval Chachamim Omrim Bei Shochtim Zevach Echad. So, but the Gemara, but Abaya says, no, wait a minute, I want to defend my chaver. He's asking a good question. Only according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, who sometimes is mentioned anonymously in the Mishnah, is there such a din that two people cannot do the shechita of a kudshim animal together. But the Chachamim disagree with that. And the Chachamim say that even with kudshim, it's valid if two people do one animal, shecht one animal. So what are you going to say according to the Chachamim? Why didn't the Mishnah Para, Maseches Para, address the Chachamim Shita, that the first guy will not become tamei and only the second guy will become tamei? And furthermore, Ula Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon Nami, Liflo kegon deshachat chad gavra b'shnei sudrim, the sudr kamalo mitame v'sudr basra mitame. So the Gemara says, I'll give you another illustration, even according to Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon, that you can't have two people doing one shechita. You could also create a scenario where there will be a difference if you hold that the shechita is only accounted at the very end. When one guy is shechting, think about it like this. Let's say he's wearing a yarmulke at the beginning of the shechita. Another guy comes, pulls off his yarmulke, and puts on a different yarmulke, okay, as he's finishing the shechita. So which yarmulke becomes tamei? Only the second yarmulke becomes tamei, and the first yarmulke doesn't become tamei. So why didn't the Mishnah address that case? That it's not unconditional that your shechita will make your clothing tamei. So the Gemara answers, so Ella bipsula depara kamairi behechshera lo kamairi. So the Gemara's answer is, you're right, that could have been addressed by the Mishnah, but the Mishnah Maseches Para was only talking about scenarios where through the para becoming puzzle at some stage, at what stage does a person's clothing become tamei if in the middle the para aduma became puzzle? You're talking about a case where sometimes a person's clothing will become tamei, sometimes it won't, but where the para is not becoming puzzle. And that the Mishnah was not addressing. And that's the reason why it wasn't addressed by the Mishnah. So you have no raya one way or the other, whether yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'yatsof or eina l'shchita ela lebasof. That machlokas still stands. And we'll hold it here for today. Have a wonderful
Galactic Circus Act.